Alrighty, so in week 10, we are going to complete section 8 for doing the code up, which is really where he takes what we learned in our last develop project, right? In week 7, not the exact same one, his weather app, and he then implements it with a small front end calling the back end. So I was working on my version of Dev 3 today, and I realized before I get too far, I should stop and give you kind of where I've gotten to and just maybe helpfully answer any questions that are lingering for you about what you need to do. And then I've also put together the week 10 learn together. And I'll talk about what I mean here as we go through the code. But generally, having said that, is that if you remember, we wrote our API call using Axios and promises. I mean, not everyone, but most of us did, right? And so in section 6, we saw him rewrite the weather API call with callbacks. And this is what he implemented when you finish this section 8. So my question, and this is something I had to kind of think about for myself, is was I going to rewrite my API call in this callback style? Now the benefit of that is it's going to be maybe more clear in the beginning how to then make that content show up on the page because you're going to have the demo for that. Or whether you're going to keep it in whatever you did it in. Again, most of us did Axios and promises, and then just figure out how to make that code work or that response work in the web page. So I've decided I'm going to stick with Axios and promises for now. I actually might, if I have time, rewrite it into callbacks. But honestly, if I had time, I think I would actually do my Dev 1. Because this way of writing front ends and interacting with the code on the server is a little different, and I like it, and I like this style. So let me show you what I've done first to help clarify possibly any questions you still may have about what you need to do. So what I did is I set up a site, okay, and then, well, that's kind of cool. Sorry, I just realized that nice little function there. But I set up a simple site that had a couple of links. Now I haven't populated these links yet, and these links are going to end up being views, okay? Just straight up views. But this first one is where all the dynamic stuff happens, right? So in this sense, I left it very much like what he did on the weather, implementing it on section 8. But what I did, obviously, is I needed a little more input, not just the address, but I wanted a search term and a optional phone number. So let me show you how I handled those. And right now I'm not fully implemented, but what I can do is actually, let's say I'm searching for gas. Well, what I have right now set up is to where it at least calls the endpoint that I've created and it just presents the information back to me, right? Well, it's supposed to. It was before I left work. Anyway, I'll show you what I did. I was playing around with the code and I probably broke something. As a matter of fact, let's see. Oh no, I don't have any errors. So I just probably broke something right before I started. But what I did here is I then figured out a way to present that information back. So at least that's what I'm going to show you what I've done. Okay. And before leaving this, what I would say is on these other ones, you can kind of choose what you would have these pages. These are just basically static pages using template, the templating engine, HBS, or if you choose something different, just to give some basic content about, what your API call was or about your program or anything like that. Right. But you can see here I have a nav bar, right? The other thing is this is responsive so that, and actually what I want to do is put up mostly you've seen this little hamburger or icon that you have, right? So I did a simple layout there. Okay, so let me show you in my Dev3 what I did. Here's I set up in my public a CSS and of course a JS file. Now, so this is my client side JS, right? So this is not really at this point much different than what he's done. Except that, and this is important to know, I had more than one input field. So, and let me show you where those are at. Those are my templates in my index HBS file. Because I had address, search, and phone, I couldn't just do what he did, which was input on selecting that on the client side, selecting that to grab that value. I couldn't use the tag because there was more than one. I guess I could have because it'll come back as an array, but I decided to be just as easy to identify, give these IDs, okay? And so by doing that, what I can do here is in my client side is then grab those, right? And this is something, right, most of you are going to probably think about. I went ahead and for now, I'm going to play with this. I did his message 1 and 2, which is placing those, a place for me to present data back to the user. And I'll show you a little bit how I ended up using views, but let me just continue where I'm at. And then I did an event listener, right? So when you hit submit, you prevent the default. And that's just so that what normally happens on a form submission doesn't happen here. I grab whatever is typed into there. And then I do the fetch, right? So here I have my endpoint set up. I have my address equals whatever that location, and location is just equal to that place on the DOM that I've determined up here as far as a placeholder to say, go look in query selector, that ID field I was talking about. Okay, so then because I want to add also a search term and a phone number, I ended up doing this in just straight concatenation, but you can do it however you want. Actually, I want to do single quotes, but that still works as location. And my next search equals search term and phone. So this is how you can then change your fetch call to then have multiple fields, right? So again, these 3 fields here is how now this is just one way. There are different ways you can do this, right? And then I got a response. And at this point, I haven't really changed anything here because I was just playing around with, and I'll show you now in my source, in my app.js, where my, right now is my Express code, right? Nothing new here, right? So here's my root route, and here's the route that I'm calling for nearby. Now this is kind of interesting because he actually did this to where he said, if nothing is in that address or that, for me, the search, because phone was optional, then he returns. The other way you can do this, and you could talk about benefits or offsets, you can actually, and if you've taken my client side, you know this, is you can also just put at the end of the tag required. And that actually allows you to then not have to write the code because by doing required in that case, the user can't actually submit the form because that field is required. So I'd also do that to my search term here, but not on my phone because my phone is optional. Okay. So coming back here, I could just leave this code, right? Because that's happening on the client side, but you could keep it here as well, right? And we've talked a little bit in class about the benefits of using, right, client versus server, and it depends on your desired outcome, right? So in this case, also, I would then set up, right? So I'm setting up for my next, and I'm actually going to change this. So if anybody's watching that is trying, this will be changed by then. This is my API key. Because when I call nearby, by the way, the first thing I did is I just response, oh, that's why I'm not getting the data back. I changed this. That's why I wasn't getting it back, because I actually had already done this, because I either I wasn't going to handle it this way. And I was just sending back the response so I could see what it looked like. So now I'm setting up for my first API call through Axios, right? So I haven't done it yet. I'm just setting up for it. But I feel like this gave me a great start on what I wanted to do. And just to show you an example of what I'm looking for, both right from the front end and at least the beginnings of what's on the back end. I still need to write a 404 page. I still need to do my other, handle my other routes for just my views. And let me just show you, since we're talking about that, it's a good time to bring that up. So here's I went ahead and I liked his directory structure of templates and then partials, right? So here's my partials. And right now I only have one view called index. So what I did in here is I ended up making 4 partials. So when you're looking at a view, right, what you see is I put the head of the website as a partial, the header and the nav. And then here is the main content for my page, and then there is my footer. Now for the index route, right, the base route, then I would also call that JS file. And I'd only need to do that here. This is something he showed, but remember, you do need to include that to get that working. So then we can just kind of go through it, but then in my head section, right, so here's all my standard head code that opens up the body. And then here's my header, right, so this is my header. Then this is my nav, right, so here's my nav, and then there's my footer. So then what this allows me to do is then each page then would have these 4 partials and then its main content. Okay. So I will actually end up, I think, creating one more video once I get a little further down. But at this point, this was enough. And actually, let me move back over here. So it's actually right here. Right, so I'm going to end up writing this code, right, using the Axios, and then figuring out based on the response, right. Once the then happens, I get a response, and then how to send that response, which is not that different than the way the callback handled it, right. And then I would have a .catch to handle my errors, and then I would send, right, just like he showed us on the way he handled it, right. So I just want to say that this is the way I'm going to do it with promises, but you would have to rewrite your API code in callbacks to exactly match what he's doing, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Might be a great exercise, but I'm going to end up using it the way I wrote it in ours. So I hope that clears that up. And like I said, what I want you to do here now is answer that and then ask, right, any other questions that you have from watching this, right? Rio, could you tell me more about this, right? Obviously, that's the best time is in class because then we can talk about that in a little more detail, right? And people have been asking me, how much CSS? Well, I like to think of his CSS as it's not baseline, it's below that. It's a minimal to start, but it wouldn't get you the full points for that. So you'd want to have some CSS above that. And remember, the key here is that you need to, during code review, describe how your CSS is creating your page layout, right? So just that. But I think I'll end with this idea so that you can actually see what I was talking about here. And actually, I should change this. And by the way, you probably want to do this is when you run is use NodeMon and have it watch because you don't have to keep doing this. But now, right, so if I do this, right, so what I could do here is then that, and I just ended up putting this on one line. So I at least know that when I'm entering this, it's actually being sent back to the browser from the endpoint. And that's a good place to be right now. If you're right there sometime this week, I would say you're in a good place to be. Okay? All right, I hope this video helps you out. Have a great one, and I'll talk to you soon.